The topic for our first video is all about matter. Matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. So examples of that include air, plastic, metal, wood, glass, paper, and cloth. Even you are made out of matter. So what I've done here is I've drawn a picture of lined paper and I've drawn a picture of a tree to remind me that these are examples of things that take up mass or rather have mass and take up space, which are the two qualities that make something matter. The topic of this year, and our first unit in this year, is chemistry. And chemistry is the study of the properties of matter and how matter changes, which is why we're talking about what matter is. There are properties that are dependent upon the makeup of something, and the way that matter changes is dependent upon what it's made of. A substance is a single kind of matter that is pure. And I highlighted the word pure here and drew two examples, one of table salt and one of sugar, because these are substances because they only have one specific thing, salt and sugar. However, something that's not a substance would be something like batter for blueberry muffins. It is a mixture of multiple different things that are not chemically combined, which is very important, and we will get to this topic of chemical combination later. Now, it's important to note that matter has two kinds of properties. It has both physical and chemical properties. And we will begin with physical properties. So physical properties are characteristics that can be observed without changing it into another substance. So an example of that is that oxygen is in a gas form at room temperature. Things that are physical properties are density, hardness, texture, color, whether or not something dissolves. So for example, if I drop a piece of gold, will it dissolve in water? Melting point, whether or not it conducts electricity, how flexible something is, changes in state, which we will talk about a little later, but the example is moving from solid to liquid to gas, whether or not something can change in shape or form, so bending, crushing, breaking, or chopping. If I have a piece of paper and I rip it or chop it into pieces, it still is made of the same chemical elements, which is what makes this physical. Chemical properties are different because chemical properties define a substance's ability to change into different substances. So if I burn a piece of paper, I've actually chemically changed it. A single substance may change into one or more substances, or two or more may combine into a new substance. So what this is describing is a chemical reaction. Examples of this are that oxygen reacts with iron to form rust. So if there's an old car and there is no longer paint on the exterior, over time, the oxygen that the iron in the car is exposed to will create rust. Silver will react with sulfur in the air to tarnish. So if you've ever had silver jewelry, you may have experienced seeing a blackish cover on the silver jewelry that sometimes you have to polish. Some examples of chemical properties include combustion, so gas and burning, electrolysis, so we can actually use electricity to break down water into hydrogen and oxygen, breaking apart the chemical bond, its ability to react, oxidation, so that is rust is an example of oxidation, the slow combination of a substance with oxygen, tarnishing, So the slow combination of a bright metal with sulfur or other substance, which produces that dark coating that we talked about. Underneath, to help remember what each of these properties are, for physical, I drew the water phase changes. So I know that when water, which is H2O, is frozen, it is in a solid form. Let's say I heat it up. I take ice and I put it in a pot and I expose it to heat and it changes into its liquid form. It's still made of 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen. And let's say I keep heating up that water. That's fire, by the way. And I get it to the place where it has now changed into its gas form or water vapor. What you'll notice here is that it's still H2O. It hasn't actually changed into a new substance. For physical properties, I drew a piece of bread. And what I want you to notice in the bread is all of these little dots. And those little dots are representing the air bubbles that exist within bread. And the reason why that's there is because gas is produced during the baking, which actually creates those spaces in the bread. So there is a transformation or a change into a different substance in this process. It is also important to note that we need to know what atoms are, because we will be talking a lot about atoms this year. Atoms are the basic particle from which all elements are made. So, elements have different properties because their atoms are different. And we'll get into more detail with that later. But right now I just want you to remember that atoms are the basic particle from which all elements are made. The word chemical bond is going to be what we are referring to when atoms combine. So I bet you've heard of something called carbon dioxide before. Emissions that come out of cars is one example, or what we breathe out every time we finish a breath. It is a combination, it is a chemical bond between 1 carbon atom and 2 oxygen atoms. Molecules are groups of 2 or more atoms held together by chemical bonds. So, I've drawn some examples. A water molecule has 3 atoms. It has 1 oxygen and 2 hydrogen. So it has a total of 3 atoms that are held together by chemical bonds. An oxygen molecule here, this is a group of 2 oxygens that are actually chemically combined. So, is it a molecule? Yes, because it has 2 or more atoms. And carbon dioxide, that is a molecule because it has 1 carbon and 2 oxygen, which means there are 3 atoms total. A compound is a little bit different. It is a pure substance that is made of 2 or more elements. This is key. It's what makes a compound different than a molecule. So 2 or more elements chemically combined in a set ratio and represented by a chemical formula. So here we can see carbon dioxide. There are 3, looking back at this picture, there are 3 atoms in here, 2 oxygen and 1 carbon. So is it a molecule? Yes, because it has 2 or more atoms. Is it also a compound? Yes, because it has 2 elements, 1 carbon and 2 oxygen, which makes it a compound. We will continue with this in our next lesson.